Poor 6-year-old girl with baby in her arms asks Millionaire for milk and says, "I promise to pay you when I grow up." He then surprises everyone with what he did. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The December wind cut through downtown Manhattan like a blade, sending newspaper scraps dancing across the frost-covered sidewalk. Richard Donovan pulled his wool coat tighter as he stepped out of his black Mercedes, the warmth of the heated seats already a distant memory. At 40 years old, he had built an empire worth over $200 million, yet tonight felt like the coldest night of his life. It had been exactly 3 years since Margaret died. 3 years since cancer stole away the only woman who had ever seen past his money to the broken man underneath. 3 years of walking through life like a ghost, going through the motions of board meetings and charity galas while feeling absolutely nothing inside. The pediatric hospital loomed before him, its windows glowing like beacons in the winter darkness. He was here for another obligatory charity event. His assistant had insisted his presence was required for the annual fundraiser. Richard had stopped caring about these things, but his company's reputation demanded he show up and write another check. As he approached the entrance, a small voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "Excuse me, mister?" Richard turned, expecting to see another fundraiser volunteer with a clipboard. Instead, he found himself looking down at a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her blonde hair was tangled and dirty, hanging limply around a face that was far too thin. Dark circles shadowed her bright blue eyes, and her clothes, a threadbare pink sweater and torn jeans, were clearly meant for warmer weather. But what made Richard's heart skip a beat was what she held in her arms. A baby, maybe 8 months old, was wrapped in what appeared to be an old hospital blanket. The infant's face was pale, and even in the dim streetlight, Richard could see the child looked seriously ill. "I'm sorry to bother you," the little girl continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you look like a nice man. Could you please buy my brother some milk? He's so hungry, and I don't have any money." Richard stared at her, his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with a determination that broke his heart. "Mommy's inside. She's very sick. The doctors say she might not come home with us." Her voice wavered, but she straightened her shoulders. "I promised her I'd take care of Michael, but he needs milk, and the machines ate all our quarters." Richard's throat tightened. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied. "Emma Rodriguez, and this is my baby brother Michael." She adjusted her grip on the baby, who had started to fuss softly. Richard knelt down to Emma's eye level, and something extraordinary happened. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something stirring in his chest, not just sympathy, but a profound connection he couldn't explain. "Emma," he said gently, "I promise you something. I'm going to help you and Michael, but not just with milk." He paused, seeing the hope blooming in her eyes. "I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about taking care of him alone again." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? But I don't have any money to pay you back." Richard smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. "What if I told you there was a way you could pay me back?" "How?" Emma asked eagerly. "Promise me that when you grow up, you'll help other children who need it, just like I'm helping you now." Emma nodded solemnly. "I promise, mister. I promise I'll pay you back when I grow up." As Richard stood and gently took Emma's small hand in his, he had no idea that this promise would change both their lives forever. He had no idea that the revelation waiting for him would be more shocking than anything he could imagine. But for now, all that mattered was the warm feeling spreading through his chest as he led Emma and baby Michael toward the hospital entrance. For the first time since Margaret's death, Richard Donovan felt truly alive. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh against Richard's eyes as he walked through the pediatric ward with Emma and Michael. The smell of antiseptic and the distant sound of monitors beeping created an all-too-familiar atmosphere that brought back painful memories of Margaret's final days. Emma led him down a long corridor, her small hand still gripping his with surprising strength. Baby Michael had fallen asleep in her arms, his breathing shallow but steady. They stopped outside room 314, where through the glass window Richard could see a young woman lying motionless in the hospital bed. "That's my mama," Emma whispered. "Maria Rodriguez. She's been sleeping for 2 days now." Richard's heart clenched as he watched the rise and fall of the woman's chest, connected to various machines. She couldn't have been more than 28 years old, her face gaunt but still beautiful, despite the illness ravaging her body. A nurse approached them, her expression a mixture of compassion and concern. "Emma, honey, you can't keep bringing Michael up here. The pediatric ICU has strict policies about infants." "Please," Emma pleaded. "He gets scared when I leave him downstairs, and Mama might wake up and want to see him." Richard stepped forward. "Excuse me, I'm Richard Donovan. I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge of Mrs. Rodriguez's care." The nurse's eyes widened slightly at the name. Even in hospitals, Richard's reputation preceded him. "Of course, Mr. Donovan. Dr. Patterson is making rounds. I'll get him immediately." While they waited, Richard knelt beside Emma again. "Tell me about your family, sweetheart. Where do you live?" Emma's voice grew even quieter. "We lived in a little apartment in Queens, but Mama couldn't work anymore because she got sick. The landlord said we had to leave last month. We've been staying at the shelter, but they said we can't come back if Mama doesn't get better soon." The weight of their situation hit Richard like a physical blow. This wasn't just about buying milk. This family was one step away from complete destitution. Dr. Patterson arrived, a kind-faced man in his 50s who immediately recognized the gravity of having Richard Donovan in his ward. After a brief conversation in the hallway, Richard learned the devastating truth. Maria had advanced stage 4 cancer. The prognosis was weeks, maybe a month at best. "What happens to the children?" Richard asked quietly. "Social services will have to be contacted," Dr. Patterson replied. "Emma's too young to care for an infant, especially one with Michael's special needs." Special needs. The baby was born with a heart condition. He'll need surgery within the next 6 months, or... The doctor didn't need to finish the sentence. Richard looked back at Emma, who was singing softly to Michael through the glass window. The little girl had no idea she was about to lose everything: her mother, her brother, her entire world. That's when Richard made a decision that would change everything. "Doctor, I want to cover all of Mrs. Rodriguez's medical expenses, everything. And I want to discuss legal arrangements for the children's care." Dr. Patterson's eyes widened. "Mr. Donovan, that's incredibly generous, but the legal complexities of—" "I'll handle the complexities," Richard said firmly. "That little girl made me a promise tonight, and I intend to make sure she gets the chance to keep it." Udi, as Emma turned from the window and smiled at him through her tears, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. But he had no idea that the Rodriguez family held a secret that would shake him to his very core. 3 days later, Richard found himself in a place he never imagined: a cramped shelter in Queens, carrying bags of groceries and supplies for Emma and Michael. His driver waited outside, clearly uncomfortable in the neighborhood, but Richard barely noticed. His entire focus was on the small blonde girl who had somehow become the center of his universe. "Mr. Richard!" Emma called out, running toward him as he entered the shelter's common area. She had started calling him that after he'd told her his name, and somehow it felt more meaningful than any title he'd ever held. Michael was looking healthier already. The antibiotics Dr. Patterson had prescribed were working, and the baby formula Richard had provided was helping him gain weight. But it was Emma's transformation that truly amazed him. The scared, desperate child from that first night was blossoming into a bright, hopeful little girl. "I have something to show you," Emma said, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "I drew you a picture." Richard examined the drawing carefully. It showed a stick figure man in a suit, holding hands with a small girl and a baby. Above them, Emma had written in careful letters, "My new family." "Emma," Richard said gently, sitting down on one of the shelter's worn couches, "I need to tell you something about your mama." Emma's face grew serious, and she climbed up beside him. "Is she going to heaven like Daddy did?" The question caught Richard off guard. "Tell me about your daddy, sweetheart." "Mama said he was a soldier. He died before Michael was born, but she said he was the bravest man she ever knew. She showed me his picture once, but we lost it when we had to leave our apartment." Emma's voice grew wistful. "She said I have his eyes." Richard studied Emma's bright blue eyes, struck by something familiar he couldn't quite place. "What was your daddy's name?" James Donovan Rodriguez. Mama said he picked Rodriguez as his middle name when they got married because he loved our family so much." The world stopped spinning. Richard's blood turned to ice as the name echoed in his mind. James Donovan Rodriguez. It couldn't be. But as he looked more closely at Emma's face, the blue eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, recognition hit him like a sledgehammer. "Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "can you tell me your daddy's full name again?" "James Michael Donovan Rodriguez," Emma repeated proudly. "Mama named Michael after Daddy. She said Daddy had the same eyes as me, and that he was the smartest, kindest man in the whole world." Richard's hands began to shake. James Michael Donovan, his son, the son he'd disowned 5 years ago when James had enlisted against his wishes. The son who had walked out of his life after a terrible fight about duty, honor, and what it meant to be a man. The son Richard had been too proud to call, too stubborn to forgive. The son who had died in Afghanistan while Richard was busy building his empire, never knowing he had grandchildren. "Mr. Richard," Emma asked, concerned, "are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard pulled Emma into his arms, tears streaming down his face for the first time since Margaret's funeral. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm better than okay." As he held his granddaughter close, feeling baby Michael stir in her arms, Richard realized that Emma hadn't just made him a promise that night outside the hospital. Fate had made him a promise too, a chance to redeem the greatest mistake of his life. But first, he had to find a way to tell Emma that the stranger who had promised to help her was actually the grandfather she'd never known existed. The penthouse apartment Richard had rented for Emma and Michael was a far cry from the shelter, but what amazed him most was how quickly the children had adapted. Emma had her own room for the first time in her life, filled with books and toys, while Michael had a nursery equipped with everything a baby could need. But it was the small moments that meant the most to Richard. Like now, as he sat on the floor of the living room, teaching Emma how to play chess while Michael crawled around them, babbling happily. "Remember, Emma, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board," Richard explained, moving the white queen across the board. "She can move in any direction and go as far as she wants." Emma studied the board intently, her small fingers hovering over her pieces, like Mama was for us. "Exactly like that," Richard agreed, his heart swelling with pride at her insight. It had been a week since the devastating revelation about James, and Richard still hadn't found the courage to tell Emma the truth. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that you abandoned her father? How do you admit that your pride cost you years of knowing your own grandchildren? The hired nurse, Mrs. Chen, had been a godsend, helping care for Michael while Richard spent every free moment with Emma. The little girl had a hunger for learning that reminded him so much of James at that age. She devoured every book he brought her, asked endless questions about his business, and had even started trying to read the financial newspapers he left lying around. "Mr. Richard," Emma said suddenly, looking up from the chessboard, "why don't you have any pictures of your family in your office?" Richard's throat tightened. He had taken Emma to Donovan Industries the day before, and her observant eyes had noticed what his employees had long since stopped mentioning. His office was devoid of personal photographs. "I lost someone very important to me," Richard said carefully. "It hurt too much to see his picture every day." "Was it your son?" Emma asked, with the directness that only children possess. Richard nearly choked on his coffee. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Mrs. Chen told me that Donovan is your last name, and she said maybe that's why you care about me so much, because my daddy was a Donovan too." Emma moved her pawn forward. "Was my daddy your son?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard looked into those familiar blue eyes, James's eyes, and knew he couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," he whispered, "James was my son, your daddy was my son, and I was a foolish old man who let pride come between us." Emma's eyes widened, but instead of confusion or anger, Richard saw something unexpected: relief. "So you're my grandpa?" she asked simply. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your grandpa. Emma stood up and walked around the chessboard to where Richard sat. Without a word, she climbed into his lap and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I'm glad," she whispered against his ear. "I always wanted a grandpa, and Daddy would be happy that you're taking care of us now." Richard held her tight, overwhelmed by the forgiveness in her voice. "How can you be so understanding? I failed your father. I wasn't there when he needed me." Emma pulled back to look at him seriously. "Mama always said that loving someone means forgiving them when they make mistakes. She said Daddy loved you very much even when you were fighting." "She said that?" "She said Daddy talked about you all the time. He wanted to call you when Michael was born, but he was scared you were still angry." Emma's voice grew sad. "Then he went to heaven before he could try." Richard's heart shattered and mended itself in the same moment. James had wanted to reconcile. His son had wanted to come home. "Emma, I promise you something," Richard said, echoing the words from that first night. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the time I lost with your daddy. And I'm going to make sure you and Michael know how much he loved you. Will you tell me stories about when Daddy was little like me?" "Every day," Richard promised. "Starting tomorrow, I'll tell you about the time your daddy tried to build a rocket in the backyard and nearly burned down the garage." Emma giggled, the sound like music to Richard's ears. As she settled back into his lap to continue their chess game, Richard realized that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the deepest pain. But he still didn't know about the final secret Maria was keeping, one that would change everything once again. Maria Rodriguez opened her eyes for the first time in 4 days, and the first word she whispered was Emma. Richard had been sitting beside her bed when it happened, having spent every evening at the hospital after Emma and Michael went to sleep. Dr. Patterson had warned him that these moments of consciousness might be brief, so Richard wasted no time. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said gently, "I'm Richard Donovan. I've been taking care of Emma and Michael." Maria's eyes focused on him with effort, and what he saw there wasn't the gratitude he expected, but fear. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're James's father." "Yes. Emma told you about me?" Maria tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. "Where are my children? Are they safe?" "They're safe. They're at my apartment with a nurse. They're healthy, fed, and loved." Richard leaned closer. "Maria, I know about James. I know he was my son. I know I failed him." Tears began to flow down Maria's cheeks. "He loved you so much. Even after the fight, even after you told him never to come back, he never stopped loving you." The words hit Richard like physical blows. "I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong." "He wanted to call you when Emma was born," Maria continued, her breathing labored. "But he was afraid. He said you told him that if he enlisted, you'd disown him, that he'd be dead to you." Richard closed his eyes, remembering the awful things he'd said in anger. "I didn't mean it. I was scared of losing him, and my fear made me cruel." "He died believing you hated him," Maria said, and the simple statement nearly destroyed Richard. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Maria studied his face for a long moment. "But you love them now, Emma and Michael. I can see it in your eyes. More than my own life. Then I need to tell you something." Maria's voice grew urgent. "Something James never knew. Something that changes everything." Richard leaned in closer, sensing the importance of her words. "When James and I got married, I was already pregnant. Emma isn't his biological daughter." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "What do you mean?" Richard asked, though part of him already understood. "I was pregnant from a previous relationship that ended badly. When I met James, I was scared and alone. He knew about the pregnancy, and he chose to love Emma anyway. He chose to be her father." Maria's eyes filled with tears. He never treated her any differently than Michael. To him, she was his daughter in every way that mattered. Richard's mind raced. "Does Emma know?" "No, and I never planned to tell her. James was her father in every way that mattered. He loved her, raised her, died protecting the freedom of the country she would grow up in." Maria coughed, and Richard could see her strength fading. "But now that you know about them, now that you're taking care of them, I needed you to know the truth." Richard felt the world shifting beneath him. Emma wasn't his biological granddaughter. But as he thought about the chess games, the bedtime stories, the way she'd forgiven him so easily, he realized something profound. Biology didn't matter. Love did. "Maria," he said firmly, "James chose to be Emma's father, and now I choose to be her grandfather. Nothing changes." Relief flooded Maria's face. "You mean that?" "I mean it with every fiber of my being. Emma and Michael are my family now. They'll never want for anything, and they'll always know they're loved." Maria smiled through her tears. "There's one more thing. A letter. James wrote it before his last deployment. It's for you. I kept it, hoping someday I'd have the courage to send it." She pointed weakly to the bedside table drawer. Inside, Richard found an envelope with his name written in James's familiar handwriting. "Read it when you're ready," Maria whispered. "But know that your son never stopped believing you'd find your way back to each other." As Maria closed her eyes and drifted back into unconsciousness, Richard held the letter in his trembling hands. Whatever James had written, whatever final words his son had left for him, Richard knew they would either destroy him completely or give him the strength to become the grandfather Emma and Michael deserved. But he wasn't prepared for what the letter would reveal about the night James died, and the choice his son had made that would honor Emma's promise in ways Richard never could have imagined. Richard waited until he was alone in his study before opening James's letter. The envelope was worn, as if Maria had held it countless times over the past 3 years. His hands shook as he unfolded the pages, seeing his son's handwriting for the first time since their terrible fight. "Dad, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and Maria found the courage to reach out to you. I hope you can forgive her for keeping this letter so long. I made her promise to only send it if I didn't make it home. I know you're angry with me. I know you think I threw away everything you built for our family. But I need you to understand why I had to serve. It wasn't about rejecting your values or your love. It was about embracing them. You taught me that with great privilege comes great responsibility. You showed me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he's willing to sacrifice for others. You probably don't remember, but when I was 8 years old, you took me to visit the children's hospital where you volunteered. You told me that night that money was just a tool. The real treasure was using it to help people who couldn't help themselves. That's what I'm doing here, Dad. I'm using the strength and opportunities you gave me to protect people who can't protect themselves. Every child I help save here is a child who gets the chance at life that you've given to so many others. I have a family now, Dad. A wife named Maria, who reminds me of Mom every day, strong, compassionate, and way too good for me. And a daughter named Emma, who has your stubborn streak and Mom's gentle heart. She's not my biological daughter, but she's mine in every way that matters. Love makes family, not blood. You taught me that when you chose to love Mom despite her past. There's also a baby coming. Michael. I've decided to name him after your father, the grandfather who taught you that honor and business could coexist. I hope someday you'll meet them both. I hope someday I'll have the courage to call you and you'll have the grace to forgive me. But if something happens to me, and you're reading this instead, please know this. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping we'd find our way back to each other. And if Maria and the children ever need help, I know you'll be there for them, because underneath all that stubborn pride, you're the most generous, loving man I've ever known. Take care of them, Dad. Help Emma grow up to be strong and kind. Help Michael know that his father loved him, even though we never got to meet. And help Maria understand that losing me doesn't mean losing hope. There's something else, Dad, something I've never told anyone except Maria. The night before I enlisted, I drove by the house. I sat outside for hours, trying to get the courage to knock on your door. I saw you through the window, sitting in your study, and you looked so tired, so lonely. I almost came in a dozen times, but then I remembered the last thing you said to me. If you walk out that door, you're no son of mine. I thought you meant it. I thought you really wanted me gone. I realize now that you were just scared, just like I was scared the night I sat outside our house. Scared people say terrible things they don't mean. I forgive you, Dad. I hope you can forgive me too. I'm going to end this letter with a promise, just like the ones you used to make me make when I was little and did something wrong. I promise that no matter what happens, I'll try to make you proud. I'll be brave, I'll be honorable, and I'll protect the innocent. And Dad, if something does happen to me and you do find Emma and Michael, please tell them about the grandfather who taught their father that true strength comes from lifting others up. Tell them that their daddy loved them enough to die for the world they'll inherit. Your son, James P.S. There's one more thing. I've been putting aside money from my deployment pay, saving it for Emma's college fund. It's not much, but it's in an account under her name at First National. The account number is written on the back of this letter. I know it's not enough, but I wanted her to know that her daddy was planning for her future even from here. Richard read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. His son had forgiven him. More than that, James had understood him in ways Richard had never understood himself. With trembling fingers, he turned the letter over and found the account information James had mentioned. But what made his blood run cold was the date of the last deposit, December 15th, 3 years ago, the same date James had died. His son had made a deposit to Emma's college fund on the very day he'd been killed in action. Richard picked up his phone and called his personal banker despite the late hour. 20 minutes later, he had the full account details. James had been depositing money faithfully for 2 years, building up a fund that now totaled nearly $30,000. But it was the final deposit that broke Richard's heart. $10,000, transferred just hours before James's convoy was attacked. His son's last act on earth had been to provide for Emma's future. As Richard sat in his study, holding his son's letter and thinking about the little blonde girl sleeping peacefully upstairs, He realized that Emma's promise to pay him back wasn't just about helping other children someday. It was about honoring the legacy of a father who had understood, even in his final moments, that love transcends biology, that family is a choice, and that the greatest gift you can give a child is the promise of a better tomorrow. Tomorrow, he would tell Emma about her father's letter. But tonight, he would simply be grateful that fate had given him a second chance to be the grandfather James had always believed he could be. What Richard didn't know was that Maria had one final secret, one that would transform his understanding of what it truly meant to keep a promise. The knock on Richard's apartment door came at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, shattering the peaceful routine he'd built with Emma and Michael over the past month. Through the peephole, he saw two official-looking individuals with badges and clipboards. "Mr. Donovan," the stern-faced woman introduced herself as she stepped inside. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from Child Protective Services, and this is Detective Rodriguez. We need to discuss the Rodriguez children." Emma looked up from where she was feeding Michael his morning bottle, her blue eyes immediately filling with worry. Richard moved protectively between the social workers and the children. "Is there a problem?" Richard asked, though his lawyer's instincts already told him exactly what this was about. "We've received reports that you've been caring for these children without proper legal authorization," Mitchell said, consulting her notes. "The mother, Maria Rodriguez, is unconscious and unable to make decisions regarding their care. We need to verify that this arrangement is in the children's best interests." "Their mother asked me to care for them," Richard said carefully. "Do you have legal documentation of that request? Signed papers, guardianship agreements?" Richard's heart sank. In his eagerness to help Emma and Michael, he'd focused on their immediate needs rather than the legal complexities. "Not formal documentation, no." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Donovan, we're not questioning your intentions, but we have protocols to follow. These children need to be placed in state custody until proper arrangements can be made." "No!" Emma's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood up, still holding Michael, her small frame trembling with determination. "You can't take us away from Grandpa Richard. This is our home now." Sarah Mitchell's eyebrows rose at the word grandpa, and Richard saw her scribbling notes furiously. "Mr. Donovan," she said slowly, "are you claiming to be related to these children?" Before Richard could answer, Emma spoke again. "He's my daddy's father. My daddy died as a soldier, and Grandpa Richard is taking care of us just like Daddy would have wanted." Richard knelt beside Emma, his heart breaking at the fear in her voice. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. We'll work this out." But Detective Rodriguez was already reaching for his radio. "We're going to need to verify these family claims. In the meantime, the children will need to come with us." "Please," Richard said, his voice cracking, "give me 24 hours. Let me get the proper documentation. Don't traumatize these children by dragging them away from the only stability they've known." "Oh." Sarah Mitchell studied Emma, who was now crying silently while trying to comfort a fussing Michael. "One day, Mr. Donovan. But if you can't provide proof of legal guardianship or family relationship by tomorrow morning, we'll have no choice but to place them in temporary foster care." After the officials left, Richard immediately called his lawyer, his hands shaking as he dialed. Emma sat on the couch, holding Michael tightly, her face pale with fear. "Grandpa Richard," she whispered, "are they going to take us away?" Richard sat beside her and pulled both children into his arms. "I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent that, sweetheart, but I need you to be brave for me, okay?" "I'm trying to be brave," Emma said, her voice muffled against his chest. "But I'm scared. What if they put us in different homes? What if I can't take care of Michael anymore?" "That's not going to happen," Richard said firmly. though privately he wasn't sure how he could guarantee that promise. His lawyer arrived within an hour, bringing stacks of legal documents and a grim expression. "Richard, this is more complicated than I initially thought. Without formal adoption papers or guardianship documents, you have no legal standing, and proving paternity posthumously will take weeks, maybe months. What about Maria? Can she sign something?" "She'd have to be conscious and declared mentally competent, given her condition." The lawyer shook his head. That evening, as Richard tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with eyes far too wise for her 6 years. "Grandpa Richard, if they take us away tomorrow, I want you to know something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "You kept your promise. You said you'd help us, and you did. You gave us a home and made us feel loved. Even if it's only for a little while, you gave us more than we ever dreamed of." Richard's throat tightened. "Emma, I'm not giving up. Tomorrow we're going to see your mama, and we're going to figure this out together." But as Richard lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he wondered if his money and influence would be enough to fight a system designed to protect children from exactly the kind of informal arrangement he'd created. Time was running out, and tomorrow might be the day he lost his grandchildren forever. The call came at 4:17 a.m., jolting Richard from a restless sleep. Dr. Patterson's voice was urgent and strained. "Mr. Donovan, you need to get to the hospital immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez is awake, but her condition has deteriorated significantly. If there's anything she needs to say or do, it has to be now." Richard woke Mrs. Chen and asked her to stay with the children, then rushed to the hospital through the empty pre-dawn streets. When he arrived at Maria's room, he barely recognized the woman who had been sleeping peacefully just days before. Her skin was grey, her breathing labored, and the machines around her were beeping with increasing urgency. "Richard," Maria whispered when she saw him, "the children, are they safe?" "For now," Richard said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "But Maria, I need your help. Social services wants to take them into custody. I need legal documentation that shows you want me to care for them." Maria nodded weakly. "I already thought of that. Last week, when I was awake for a few minutes, I asked Dr. Patterson to contact my lawyer. She's been preparing papers." Relief flooded through Richard. "Where are they?" "In the safe at my lawyer's office. But Richard, there's something else. Something urgent about Michael." Maria struggled to sit up. "His heart condition is worse than the doctors initially thought. He needs surgery within the next 2 weeks or—" She didn't need to finish. Richard had seen the reports from Michael's recent tests. Without the surgery, the baby wouldn't live to see his first birthday. "The surgery costs over $200,000, Maria continued. "Even with insurance, I can't afford it, but I wrote something in my will, a request." "What kind of request?" Maria reached for his hand with surprising strength. "I'm asking you to adopt both children legally, not just for the money, but because they need a father. Emma needs someone to walk her down the aisle someday. Michael needs someone to teach him how to be a man." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Maria, I would be honored." "There's more," she said, her voice growing weaker. "Emma's college fund, the one James started. There's something about it you need to know." Before she could continue, alarms began sounding throughout the room. Nurses rushed in, followed by Dr. Patterson, and Richard was pushed into the hallway as they worked to stabilize Maria. 45 minutes later, Dr. Patterson emerged with news that changed everything. "She's stable for now, but barely. Mr. Donovan, I have to be honest with you. Mrs. Rodriguez has hours, maybe a day at most. Whatever legal arrangements need to be made, they need to happen immediately." Richard called his lawyer, Maria's lawyer, and a judge he knew personally. By noon, Maria's hospital room had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom. With Maria barely conscious but mentally alert enough to sign documents, the legal papers were finalized. Richard Donovan was now the legal guardian of Emma and Michael Rodriguez, with the path cleared for full adoption proceedings. But even as he held the signed papers, Richard's mind was on Maria's unfinished words about Emma's college fund. What hadn't she told him? As the afternoon wore on, Maria drifted in and out of consciousness. During one of her lucid moments, she gripped Richard's hand urgently. "The college fund," she whispered. "Emma's college fund. Check the deposit records carefully. James made deposits every month, but the amounts, they're not what they seem." "What do you mean?" James was saving more than just his deployment pay. He was putting aside money from somewhere else, significant amounts. I never knew where it came from until after he died. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "Where did the money come from, Maria?" But before she could answer, Maria's eyes closed, and this time, they didn't open again. "Doctor." Patterson checked her vitals and looked up at Richard with sympathetic eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan. Mrs. Rodriguez has slipped into a coma. Given her condition, she likely won't regain consciousness." As Richard sat beside Maria's bedside that evening, holding the legal documents that made him officially responsible for Emma and Michael, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something crucial he didn't know about James, about Emma's college fund, and about the family he'd just inherited. Emma and Michael were legally his now, but time was running out for Michael's surgery, and somewhere in the mystery of James's deposits lay a secret that could change everything once again. "Grandpa Richard, why are you crying?" Emma's voice was soft but concerned as she found Richard in his study the next morning, staring at bank statements and legal documents spread across his desk. He'd been up all night, trying to piece together the mystery of James's college fund deposits, while grappling with the reality that Maria was dying. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Richard said, quickly wiping his eyes and turning to face her. "How's Michael this morning?" "Mrs. Chen is giving him his medicine, but he seems tired." Emma climbed into the chair across from Richard's desk, her legs swinging as she studied his face. "Are you worried about Michael's surgery?" Richard was constantly amazed by Emma's perceptiveness. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, and despite his wealth, he was terrified about the risks involved. "A little bit," he admitted. "But Dr. Patterson says Michael is strong, and the surgeon is one of the best in the country." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama used to say that when we're scared about something, we should think of 3 good things that might happen instead of the bad things." "That's very wise advice. What 3 good things are you thinking about?" "Well," Emma said, counting on her small fingers, "first, Michael will get better and grow up to be big and strong. Second, you won't be sad anymore because we'll all be together and happy. And third—" She paused, looking suddenly shy. "What's the 3rd thing, sweetheart?" "Maybe someday I really will be able to pay you back for everything you've done for us." Richard felt his heart clench. "Emma, you don't owe me anything. Taking care of you and Michael isn't something you need to repay." "But I promised," Emma said seriously. "That first night I promised I'd pay you back when I grow up. And promises are important." "You're absolutely right. Promises are very important." Richard studied her determined expression, seeing so much of James in her resolve. "Tell me, what do you think you might like to be when you grow up?" Emma's eyes lit up. "I want to help sick children like Michael. Maybe I could be a doctor or work at the hospital like the nice nurses who take care of Mama." "That's a wonderful dream, Emma. And you know what? I think you'd be an amazing doctor." "Really? But don't you have to be really smart to be a doctor?" Richard smiled. "You're already one of the smartest people I know. You read books meant for kids twice your age, you beat me at chess yesterday, and you take better care of Michael than most adults could." Emma beamed at the praise, but then her expression grew serious again. "Grandpa Richard, can I ask you something about my daddy?" "Of course, sweetheart, anything. Mrs. Chen told me that sometimes soldiers get medals when they're brave. Did my daddy get any medals? Richard's throat tightened. He'd avoided looking into James's military service record, afraid of what he might find, but Emma deserved to know about her father's honor. "Let me make some calls and find out," he said. "Would you like to know about your daddy's service?" Emma nodded eagerly. "I want to know everything about him." Mama said he was the bravest man she ever knew, but she got too sad to talk about him very much. That afternoon, while Emma played with Michael in the nursery, Richard called his contacts in the military. What he learned left him speechless. Staff Sergeant James Michael Donovan Rodriguez had been awarded the Bronze Star for valor, the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and posthumously the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The citation for the Silver Star revealed that James had died while single-handedly holding off an enemy attack that allowed his convoy to evacuate 37 wounded Afghan civilians, including 15 children. But it was the final detail that broke Richard's heart. James's final words, reported by the soldier who found him, were, "Tell my family I kept my promise." As Richard sat in his study that evening, reading James's military commendations while listening to Emma read a bedtime story to Michael, he realized that the little girl upstairs had inherited more than just her father's eyes. She'd inherited his courage, his compassion, and his unshakable belief in keeping promises. Tomorrow he would tell Emma about her father's medals, but tonight he would simply be grateful that James's promise to protect others lived on in the little girl who had promised to help sick children when she grew up. The college fund mystery could wait another day. Some things, like watching his granddaughter become the remarkable person her father had always believed she could be, were more important than money. Maria Rodriguez died at 3:22 a.m. on a Thursday morning, with Richard holding her hand and whispering promises about Emma and Michael's future. Her last coherent words were, "Tell Emma, her daddy's treasure box." The funeral was small but meaningful. Emma wore a black dress Richard had bought for her, and she held Michael throughout the service, singing softly to him when he became fussy. Richard was amazed by her strength, but he could see the grief in her eyes despite her brave front. After the service, they returned to Maria's belongings, which had been stored in the hospital's patient services room. There wasn't much. A few photographs, some clothing, and a small wooden box that Emma immediately recognized. "That's Mama's treasure box," Emma said, pointing to the worn wooden container. "She said Daddy gave it to her before he went away to be a soldier." Richard opened the box carefully, revealing its contents. A few letters in James's handwriting, Maria's wedding ring, a photograph of James in his military uniform, and at the bottom, a key with a number tag attached. "What's this key for?" Richard asked, examining the small brass object. Emma shrugged. "Mama never told me. She just said it was part of Daddy's treasure." That evening, while Emma was having her bath and Michael was napping, Richard called the number on the key tag. It led him to a storage facility in Queens, and after providing the necessary identification and legal documents, he found himself standing in front of storage unit 247. The key turned easily, and the metal door rolled up to reveal a small space filled with carefully organized boxes and containers. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just storage. This was James's life, meticulously preserved and organized. The first box contained James's college textbooks and papers, including a business degree from Columbia University that Richard never knew his son had completed through night classes while working. The second box held detailed financial records and investment portfolios that showed James had been steadily building wealth through careful investing and business partnerships. But it was the third box that changed everything. Inside, Richard found a thick folder labeled Emma's Future and another labeled Emergency Fund. Used to, the Emma's Future folder contained detailed plans for Emma's education, including applications to prestigious prep schools, scholarship information, and a detailed letter outlining James's dreams for his daughter's academic success. The Emergency Fund folder revealed the truth about the mysterious college fund deposits. James hadn't just been saving his deployment pay. He'd been running a small but successful consulting business, helping other soldiers invest their money and plan for their futures after service. The business had been generating substantial income, all of which James had been depositing into Emma's college fund and the emergency fund he'd created for his family's future. By the time of his death, James had accumulated over $150,000 in investments and savings, money that Maria either didn't know about or had forgotten in her grief and illness. But the final folder in the box contained something that made Richard sink to his knees in amazement. It was labeled "For Dad" and contained a detailed business proposal for a foundation dedicated to helping military families transition to civilian life. The proposal was professionally written, thoroughly researched, and included a personal letter from James explaining his vision. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means something happened to me and you found your way to Emma and Michael. This storage unit is my gift to them and to you. I've been building something here, not just money, but a plan. A way to help other families like mine, other soldiers who need guidance transitioning back to civilian life, other children who need opportunities. I called it the Donovan Family Foundation in my notes, hoping that someday you and I would build it together. But if I'm not there to do it with you, maybe you and Emma can build it instead. The money in these accounts is enough to get started, but I know you have the resources and influence to make it something truly special. Emma is smart enough to help you understand what soldiers' families really need, and she's compassionate enough to make sure we never lose sight of why we're doing it. This is my real gift to you, Dad. Not just Emma and Michael, but a chance to build something meaningful together, a way to turn our family's pain into purpose. Love always, James." As Richard sat in the storage unit, surrounded by his son's carefully planned legacy, he realized that Maria's final words about the treasure box had led him to something more valuable than money. James had left him a roadmap for healing their family and helping others at the same time. Emma's promise to pay him back when she grew up was about to take on a whole new meaning. Together, they would build the foundation James had dreamed of, and in doing so, they would honor not just James's memory, but the promise Emma had made that snowy night outside the hospital. But first, they had to get Michael through his surgery, and Richard had a feeling that the biggest test of their new family was still to come. The night before Michael's surgery, Emma couldn't sleep. Richard found her in the nursery at 2 a.m., sitting in the rocking chair beside Michael's crib, humming the same lullaby Maria used to sing. "Sweetheart, you should be in bed," Richard said gently, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm scared, Grandpa Richard," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the dim light from the hallway. "What if something goes wrong? What if Michael doesn't wake up after the surgery?" Richard's heart ached for the little girl who had already lost so much. Dr. Patterson and Dr. Williams are the best doctors in the country. They've done this surgery hundreds of times. But what if Michael is different? What if his heart is too sick? Richard lifted Emma into his lap, holding her close as they both watched Michael's small chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. "Emma, do you remember what you told me that first night we met, about your promise?" Emma nodded against his chest. "You promised to pay me back by helping other children when you grew up. But you know what? You've already started paying me back." "How?" "By teaching me how to love again, by showing me what it means to have a family, by being brave and strong and kind, even when everything seems scary." Richard stroked her hair gently. Your daddy would be so proud of the little girl you've become." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Will you tell me about Daddy's medals again?" Richard had told her about James's military honors the day before, watching her eyes shine with pride as she learned about her father's heroism. "Your daddy was awarded the Bronze Star for being brave in battle, the Purple Heart because he was hurt while protecting others, and the Silver Star because he saved 37 people, including 15 children, before he went to heaven." 15 children, Emma repeated softly. "That's like 2 whole classrooms of kids." "That's right. Your daddy saved 2 classrooms full of children because he believed every child deserves a chance to grow up and follow their dreams." Emma sat up to look at Richard directly. "Is that why he started the foundation plans? To help more children?" Richard had shown Emma the storage unit discovery the day before, explaining James's vision for helping military families. "Yes, sweetheart. Your daddy wanted to make sure that other families wouldn't have to struggle the way yours did. When Michael gets better, can we start working on Daddy's foundation?" "Absolutely. In fact, I've already started making some calls. There are a lot of families out there who need help, and with your daddy's plans and your ideas about what children really need, we can make a real difference." Emma smiled for the first time in days. "Maybe that's how I'll really pay you back, by helping you build something Daddy would be proud of." "I think that sounds perfect." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching Michael sleep. Finally, Emma spoke again. "Grandpa Richard, tomorrow when they take Michael into surgery, will you stay with me? I wouldn't be anywhere else, sweetheart. And after the surgery, when Michael is all better, will we still be a family?" Richard felt tears prick his eyes. "Emma, we'll be a family forever. Nothing will ever change that. You're stuck with me now." Emma giggled softly. "Good. I like being stuck with you." At 6 a.m. they made their way to the hospital. Emma had packed a small bag with Michael's favorite blanket, a stuffed animal Richard had bought him, and the photograph of James in his military uniform. "I want him to have Daddy's picture with him," Emma explained, "so he knows Daddy is watching over him during the surgery." As they prepared Michael for surgery, Emma kissed his forehead and whispered, "Be brave, little brother. When you wake up, we're going to start building Daddy's foundation together. There are lots of children who need our help." Richard watched in amazement as Emma, just 6 years old, found the strength to comfort everyone around her, the nurses, other families in the waiting room, and most importantly, him. As Michael was wheeled into surgery, Emma took Richard's hand and looked up at him with eyes full of determination. "Now we wait," she said simply, "and we hope. And we remember that Daddy kept his promise to save children, so now it's our turn to keep our promise too." The surgery would take 4 hours. 4 hours that would determine whether Michael lived or died, whether their new family would survive intact, and whether Emma's promise to pay Richard back would have the chance to come true. But as Richard looked down at the remarkable little girl beside him, he realized that no matter what happened in that operating room, Emma had already given him the greatest gift imaginable: the chance to love again, to be needed again, and to believe again in the power of promises kept. Mr. Donovan, the surgery was a complete success. Dr. William's words echoed through the hospital waiting room as Richard felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Beside him, Emma jumped up from her chair, her face lighting up with pure joy. "Michael's heart is strong now," the surgeon continued, smiling at Emma. "He's going to grow up to be a healthy, normal little boy." Emma threw her arms around Richard's waist, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "He did it, Grandpa Richard. Michael did it." As they waited to see Michael in recovery, Richard noticed Emma pulling something from her pocket, a crumpled envelope he'd never seen before. "What's that, sweetheart?" "It's a letter Mama gave me before she got really sick. She said to only open it after Michael's surgery." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. "She said, It was the most important thing she ever wanted to tell me. Richard watched as Emma's eyes moved across the page, her expression changing from curiosity to confusion to something he couldn't quite identify. "Grandpa Richard," Emma said slowly, looking up at him with wide eyes, "I think you need to read this." With shaking hands, Richard took the letter. Maria's handwriting was weak but clear. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, Michael's surgery is over and you're both safe with Richard. There's something I've needed to tell you your whole life, but I was afraid it would change how much you loved your daddy James. The truth is, sweetheart, I lied about your real father. It wasn't a bad relationship that ended. It was something beautiful that ended too soon. Your real father was Richard's son too, but not James. Your biological father was David Donovan, James's older brother, who died in a car accident just 2 months before you were born. David and I were going to be married, but he died before I could tell him I was pregnant with you. When I met James a year later, he knew about David. He chose to love you as his own daughter because you were his brother's child, his niece, and because he saw David's kindness in your eyes. Emma, you are Richard's biological granddaughter. You carry the Donovan blood, David's gentle heart and James's courage. You are the bridge between two brothers who loved each other deeply. I kept this secret because I wanted you to know James as your father, which he was in every way that mattered. But now that you're with Richard, you should know that when you call him Grandpa, it's not just by choice, it's by blood, by love, and by the miracle that brought you to each other that snowy night. Richard lost 2 sons, David to an accident, James to war, but he gained something precious, you. Take care of each other. Love always. Mama. Richard's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the letter. Emma was his biological granddaughter, David's daughter. David, his firstborn, the son he'd lost at 24, lived on in this remarkable little girl. "Grandpa Richard," Emma said softly, "are you okay?" Richard looked down at her, really looked at her, and suddenly he could see it. David's smile, David's way of tilting his head when he was thinking, David's gentle determination. How had he missed it? Tears streamed down his face as he knelt and pulled Emma into his arms. "Emma, sweetheart, do you understand what this means?" "And it means I really am your granddaughter," Emma said simply. "And it means that when I made my promise that first night, maybe Daddy David and Daddy James were both watching over us." "You beautiful, amazing child," Richard whispered, holding her tight. "You've given me back both my sons. Every time I look at you, I see David's kindness and James's courage. You haven't just paid me back, you've given me more than I ever dreamed possible. So we're really family, like really, really family." "Really, really family," Richard confirmed, laughing through his tears. 6 months later, Richard stood at the podium of the newly established Donovan Family Foundation headquarters, with Emma beside him holding a healthy, thriving Michael. The room was filled with military families, social workers, and children who would benefit from the foundation's programs. "Today," Richard began, "we launched this foundation in honor of Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez and Corporal David Donovan, 2 brothers who understood that the greatest legacy we can leave is the lives we touch and the promises we keep." Emma stepped forward to the microphone, now 7 years old and radiating confidence. "My daddy James always said that helping others was the most important job anyone could have. Today, I want to make a new promise, not just to Grandpa Richard, but to everyone here." She looked out at the crowd with David's gentle eyes and James's determined spirit. "I promise that I'll spend my whole life helping children who need families, soldiers who need homes, and anyone who needs hope. That's how I'm paying back Grandpa Richard for saving me and Michael." As applause filled the room, Richard felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with love. The foundation would help thousands of families, Michael would grow up strong and healthy, and Emma would become the doctor she dreamed of being, healing children just as she had healed him. That night, as he tucked Emma and Michael into their beds in the home they all shared, Richard realized that sometimes the most precious gifts come disguised as promises. A 6-year-old girl had promised to pay him back when she grew up, but she'd actually been paying him back every single day, with laughter, with love, and with the miracle of family restored. "Sweet dreams, my darlings," he whispered, turning off the lights. "Good night, Grandpa Richard," Emma called softly. "Thank you for keeping your promise, too." And as Richard walked to his study, he paused at the window where he'd spent so many lonely nights after Margaret died. But now, instead of emptiness, he felt gratitude. Emma had kept her promise in ways she'd never imagined, giving him back his purpose, his joy, and most importantly, his family. Sometimes the smallest promises change the biggest lives.